All right, we're going to talk about the new audio record rack, the ARK-1, or the ARK as I like to call it. ARK for audio record kit. So basically, this is really more of an audio processing kit. There is a recorder included in the kit. I'll get to that in just a sec. But basically, this is a way for the recording operator to have full control of their audio coming from the A1 that's running the main show. So in the recording rack, we've got 3 pieces of hardware. We've got a rack mount mixer up top. That's a little less for mixing and more for gain control. That goes directly to a DBX compressor, so we can compress the top of our signal a little bit to protect those peaks so it doesn't clip out the next piece of recording equipment in line. And then we can also bring up the levels overall so we can give the client a more finished audio product at the end. And then that goes to a proper DA. This is a Whirlwind DA2 distribution amplifier. We don't want to use Y cables, XLR Y cables in any of the recording setup because they're cheap and they could break more easily, most likely, than a proper distribution amplifier. So obviously here on the distribution amplifier, you've got multiple outputs. You can feed multiple record decks via XLR. So the mixer behind me is actually not part of this kit. This mixer represents the front of house mixer that the A1 would be using to run the live show. What they need to do from their mixer is they need to send you hopefully 2 duplicate outputs. That's not a left and right, that's a main and a backup. So the front of house mixer needs to hopefully have the ability to give 2 completely identical but different physical outputs from the console. You also don't want to use a Y cable up here at the console because that kind of defeats the purpose of having a main and a backup. If the Y cable goes out, both of your feeds to your recorder rack go out. So the main and the backup feed from the front of house console comes over to the record rack in the back. I'll show you that in just a sec. There are multiple inputs in the back and I'll go over those. But what the main and the backup allows us to do is to obviously have a backup. If something happens physically with the cable on line 1, then you've got a backup. And we run those into the back of the rack and the patch bay to go into primarily inputs 1 and 2. Those are your first inputs you want to try. And real quick, let's take a look at the back of the rack. I'll show you those other inputs. The back of the rack includes 4 inputs that already are patched into the mixer. These first 2 inputs are if your front of house console, that one, is expecting a hot line level signal. But if the person over at the front of house is sending a lower level signal, try putting them in inputs 3 and 4, and then you'll have better gain control on the front of the mixer. And then we have 8 outputs that correspond to the 8 outputs on that Whirlwind DA. You've got a couple of service outlets on the back, and you've got a master power that powers the entire rack, and that's about it. And the way that this particular mixer works, this is a Denon DN312X 12-channel mixer. And we're really not using it for mixing. We're using it because it has proper gain control and it has multiple inputs that we can utilize in different ways. So if the front of house operator is, sending you a nice hot signal like they should, great, no problem. We use inputs 1 and 2 because these are set to accept line level inputs. But if your A1 is sending you a low level, oftentimes during the show, you're not going to be able to talk to the A1 and say, hey, I need you to send me more level. They may not have that ability. They're busy. They've got their own job to do mixing the show and trying to take care of feedback and all that. So, obviously we need to set these things up during rehearsals. But if they tell you, you're getting what I give you and it's low, great. Well, we can actually move over to channels 3 and 4 on the back because channels 3 and 4 are set to accept mic level. So they're expecting a lower level so they won't pad the signal. So you use either inputs 1 and 2. And if you're finding that you have to gain those up way too much on the inputs, unplug from 1 and 2 in the back, plug into 3 and 4, and then 3 and 4, since they're set to accept mic level, if the A1 is sending you a lower level, a lower mic level signal overall, no problem. That's why I got this mixer, so we have multiple options to gain up and down our inputs. And then, like I said, the mixer goes automatically in the rack to the compressor and then to the DA. So the way that I've found on this particular mixer to get proper metering is, first of all, turn everything down. I have my iPad sending out a sine wave over to the mixer, just kind of like a front of house situation. The mixer is sending two outputs over to the rack right now. So the way I've found on this mixer to really show proper level on your metering is to, first of all, turn everything down. Like I said, we can see we're getting signal. And typically I will just take both the main input, which for right now is input 1, and the master at the same time, and gain those up together to get kind of true metering on the meters here. Since there are no clip lights on the input meters, there's only signaled LEDs. Turning both of these up at the same time, I have found, is the best method for this mixer. So get your signal from front of house, turn everything down, including your master. Turn up both the master and your main input up at the same time till you're hitting about 0 dBu. Great, we're hitting that. And I'm gonna double check my second channel to make sure we're at roughly the same level. And I was at about 11 o'clock on that one, so you know, my second input is a little lower, but that's okay for this example. We'll just go back to using input 1. So I've got my input 1 and my master at basically the same level on the knobs. I'm getting good metering. And now the output of the mixer automatically sends down to the compressor. Now, if you don't know how to use a compressor and you're just completely scared of it, great. Just hit bypass, and you can bypass the compressor, and then it just goes to the DA. It still goes through the compressor, but it won't utilize any of that. But the reason we have a compressor in here is because oftentimes what I'll find on recordings is that the audio is very low, because obviously we don't want to clip out anything. If the front of house operator is doing their job and not clipping out any of the inputs and sending you a nice clean feed of the show, that's great. We don't want to clip it out here either. And we don't want to clip out on our record decks, like our video cameras, our Aja Key Pros, any of the Blackmagic. We don't want to clip that out. But I find that to hand off a more finished product, we need to get the audio levels up. And the only way to do that and avoid clipping is to really compress it with an audio compressor. And I've gone with a hardware solution here so that we just have control at our fingertips without having to get a laptop and go into any software controls to get to the compressors. So we've gained up. We're sending roughly 0 in and out of the mixer. Now we come over to the compressor, and what I usually do, number one, this compressor has an expander gate. We don't want to use that. It just comes on the compressor. We don't want to use it. So turn the expander gate, turn the threshold all the way to the off position so that it doesn't use that at all. And then I usually set my compression ratio about 4:1. And then I'll basically turn the threshold all the way up so that the compressor's not doing anything. We can see it's not doing anything because we want to not start off with compression. We want to set that as we go. So we've got a good input level. We've come down to the compressor. We can see a little bit of input level here, and I'm going to start bringing my threshold down until that compressor grabs the signal and starts compressing. And my threshold is now down to just under 0, and I've got about 3 to 6 dB of compression. Now, like on any piece of equipment, if you find you're at the extreme ends of any of your knobs, something's wrong with your gain structure. So if I find that on channel 1, I've got to gain it all the way up just to get good input level, that's a sign that something else is wrong. Reassess your gain structure. But seeing we've got good input, we come here again with the threshold. You don't want to be at the extreme ends. I start off at the extreme end and want to have the threshold really way up high so that it's not doing anything, and then I'll bring that threshold down until it grabs my signal and starts compressing. If I find that I've got to bring my threshold down to -20 or -30, then I've made a mistake on my mixer up here. I'm not sending enough level to the compressor. So we're looking for that 0 dBu mark all the way through our system. So I will compress about 3 to 6 dB. And then I've got the output gain more or less set at 0. You can start at 0 if you're not sure what the output gain is. If we're compressing 3 to 6 dB, it's going to reduce our overall signal by that much. And then we can use output gain to bring that overall signal back up. So you can use it or not. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. But since I am compressing about 3 dB, I'll just click it up a couple of dB right there, so I'm getting that overall output gain back up over to the Whirlwind DA. So now we've got input gain, we've got a little bit of compression, we know that that's now going to the DA, and now we can feed our recording outputs. For this record kit, What we've included is a device that we already owned, which is a very simple Tascam DR05 recorder. You can obviously add more to this. You always need some sort of backup. Now, typically with this kit, you're not going to be doing just audio recording. You're probably going to be using this in a larger situation where you're going to feed multiple video record decks as well. Again, Aja Key Pros, you can even feed all your cameras from this station. You could have a Key Pro on channels 1 and 2, feed that. You could actually send to cameras 1, camera 2, camera 3. You could send to the recorder on 7 and 8. So you've got 8 outputs to play with. You can send different destinations. You can feed your vMix station or your streaming audio from here as well, so that you can compress before it ever goes in to your USB audio interface for a live stream. But for a quick example, we'll just turn all these down and we'll plug in the output, which is coming from this cable from the back of the patch bay, into this recorder. And I'll plug some headphones in as well. We've got our input into the recorder. I'll hit record. We don't have any level yet because I'm not sending any level. So now I'll start sending level to this recorder from my DA, which is on outputs 1 and 2 right now. I'll just send 1 for right now. Great, we can see here on the meter, and we actually hear it. I've got some white noise playing from my iPad out there. White noise, pink noise, it's some kind of noise. And we've got nice strong levels on our recorder. But you have to know your equipment, you have to do test recordings, because even though there's that little triangle on this particular recorder, if you go very far over that triangle, it will clip out the recorder and the recorder won't tell you. So always good to do a lot of test recordings, probably stay underneath that particular triangle on this recorder, but other equipment may be a little different, so make sure to do test recordings. Now, there's only one problem with this, and it has to do more with the recorder than the setup. This recorder on the 1/8 inch input is expecting mic level. You can't change it on this particular recorder. It's expecting a low level signal. But if we've gained up to 0 dBu and compressed, and we're getting basically 0 dBu or line level through all of our equipment, I can still feed that here. You can see it, but I'm barely at the bottom end of my knob. I'm at the extreme end of my knob, and that's fine. It works just fine. If I grab a microphone and we mute that, check, check, check. Hey, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Great, we can see my microphone because it's gained properly at the console. I'm also getting, good input level and good compression on the compressor here, and it's going to my recorder at the same levels. But just be aware of where your knobs are. I'm at the extreme end of this knob. If I just barely turn it, I could potentially clip out this recorder. The only way to solve that, if you needed more play in your knob, is to don't make any gain structure changes. We've gain structured appropriately. Don't limit your input gain to compensate for a particular recorder that only accepts mic level. What we can do is, in this kit, because this particular recorder is included in this kit, we've also included 2 XLR pads, 2 20 dB pads, so that on the back we can pad these outputs to the recorder so that we can have more play in the knobs. I'm going to put those in line real quick. All right, so these 2 XLR outputs are going to that little Tascam DR05. The signal's too hot, so we'll take these 2 XLR pads, put them right there, and we'll go check our Tascam. Now that I've put those XLR pads in line, we can see now that our level here on the recorder has dropped, even though we haven't moved the knob and we haven't changed our input gain structure. So now I have a lot more play in my knob to feed over to the recorder, so I have less chance of clipping this out. So keep that in mind. Don't sacrifice proper input gain for output volume at your destinations, because this may not be your only destination. You may have, again, other devices, Key Pros, other video recorders or cameras that need line level inputs. So we included the pads for this particular recorder to give you some tools at your disposal. The rest of the items in the box are all of the power cables and a power brick for the Tascam recorder so that you can put it on plug-in power versus just batteries. There's a case for the headphones. Please keep those in there when you're done. And there's just a red bag full of some spare XLR cables, and of course those XLR pads go in there as well. And all that travels with the kit. Headphones being one of the most important parts of the kit. I always bring several other pairs of headphones so I don't have to move the headphones around. but the DA does have a headphone jack, so you can't listen directly on the mixer with the headphones, nor can you listen to the compressor, but you can listen here at the DA to ensure that your sound is clean before it gets to your destinations. And then of course you always want to check your destinations as well to make sure they're getting signal, and they are, sending some noise through the iPad there. So there you have it. All right, so to recap real quick, your front of house engineer has their own console. They are sending you 2 identical feeds from their console out of 2 different outputs of their console over to you. You plug those into inputs 1 and 2 on the back of the rack, and then you come to the front of the rack and start gaining up. So we're gonna gain up channels 1 and 2 at the same time, reaching that 0 dBu mark on our meter. Now, if you're finding that you're having to turn inputs 1 and 2 way up to get enough gain, the front of house engineer is probably not sending you enough level. If they can't send you any more, no problem. Go to the back of the rack, plug into inputs 3 and 4, and then 3 and 4 are expecting that lower level signal, and you'll have more ability to gain on 3 and 4. But we have good strong level right now, so we'll gain up inputs 1 and 2 to about 0 dBu on most of our program material. Now that should automatically send to the compressor. On the compressor, make sure your expander gate threshold is off completely. Go to your threshold on your compressor section. There's 2 thresholds. Make sure the threshold on the expander gate is all the way off. Go to the threshold on the compressor section, turn it all the way up so it's not compressing. Then once we've gained and sent over to the compressor, start bringing that threshold down until we start compressing. And now we can see we've got about 3 dB of compression on our main signal. And I usually leave the ratio on about 4:1 compression. So we've compressed about 3 dB. So I'll go to my output gain. It's currently at 0, always started at 0. If I'm compressing 3 dB, click that up a couple of notches because we're compressing about 3 dB. So I'm gonna use the output gain to get it back up just that little bit more over to the DA. Then use the DA to send to all your devices. If it's this Tascam, you might want to use the XLR pad so that you don't potentially clip out your recording, have more play in your recording there. And then send to all your other devices. You're good to go. The last bit of information is that this entire rack needs to be on a battery backup so that if someone trips over your cables in the back and they kill your mains power, this rack would still stay on. So that needs to be and go for every piece of recording equipment. Every piece of recording equipment needs to be on a battery backup. That way, if something happens during show and I don't know, the wall power goes out, at least you've still got the recordings, batteries in the Tascam. Make sure this is plugged in. Do as many things on battery as you can, or at least make sure the battery is in line. So if there is a problem, the battery kicks in and you're good to go. All right, I think that's it. This isn't anything special. It's gain control, compression, distribution in a proper format, not using cheap XLR-Y cables. And that should give you everything you need to go out there and make some awesome recordings. All right, later.